Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my presentation, I would like to focus on what are the prospects of the nuclear energy, nuclear power in the region in the Middle East. Professor Kim already started that discussion, and I would like to share my view what the prospects are. 2 years ago, our Center for Energy and Security Studies published a report what the prospects of nuclear power in the Middle East are and what role Russia may play. And I would like to share some observations, of course, updates and facts, because there are a number of developments in the region in this area since 2016. Does it work? I'm not sure that the stick works. Yes. I'm not sure. Okay, thanks. So first of all, again, about the Middle East. I'm not going to discuss what countries are part of the region, but for the purpose of our report, we will focus on the Persian Gulf states plus a number of other countries. So we were not dealing with North Africa countries. Again, it was done specifically for that report. So in our report, or as part of our study, we were trying to identify all statements from the countries of the region. And we found that 13 states of the region announced plans to build about 80 reactors by 2030. Can you imagine if by 2030 we will have 90 reactors in 13 countries of the Middle East? A number of plans were not realistic from the very beginning and were done for political or domestic or foreign policy reasons. Like, for example, Yemen announced their plan to build 5 nuclear power reactors. Or even Iraq indicated its interest to build a nuclear power reactor. Bahrain, another country, which announced a plan to build a nuclear power reactor, despite of the size of the countries, many of you are well known. Some countries announce plans which are not realistic because of their scale. For example, Iran, 2023 nuclear power reactors. I will speak on that later, but they don't have enough space due to lack of water, due to seismic activity of many of the regions. They don't have enough space to build so many. And there are other examples. I will not go in all detail. So my point that there were many statements from 2005 until 2010, because some of you may remember that it was the period when a renaissance of nuclear energy was expected. So it was, using the language of Lassi Nazarbo, it was a sexy topic. And many countries of the region, not only in this region, but in Middle East and Southeast Asia in particular, were eager to indicate their interest in this technology. And as I mentioned, there are a number of natural bottlenecks for building nuclear power plants in the region. First, the lack of nuclear infrastructure, including human resources, legislative and regulatory framework, what these days IAEA called nuclear infrastructure. And again, if we have a look on the list of research reactors in the region, so just 6 countries have them. And I would like to remind that 13 stated their plans to build nuclear power plants, but just 6 of them have nuclear research reactor, which is usually considered, not always, but usually considered as a pre-step to build a nuclear power plant, to develop human resources. There are some exceptions. For example, you see that UAE not is in the list. So they do not have a nuclear research reactor, though they are going to have a first operational nuclear power reactor very soon. As I mentioned, in a number of countries there is an issue with seismic activity zones. This is an issue for Iran. Despite of all statements, and as I mentioned during our opening dinner, I'm doing Iran nuclear program studies for almost 20 years. People in Iran will understand that there are natural bottlenecks, natural boundaries, what they can do. And I mean, our estimate, for example, at best, Iran can build 12, 13 reactors, not more than that, because of that issue. And lack of water resources, where they can build nuclear power plants. Political instability and growing activity and influence of non-state actors. It's, of course, another big issue in the region. We also studied what influence, what impact Fukushima accident had in the region. And I think that in general, the impact was positive. Because many, or not many, but a few countries, like Bahrain, like Oman, like Kuwait, canceled their plans or announced that they are not going to develop nuclear energy. And when I mentioned Bahrain, for example, my problem with this country is that the size of the country is so small. You cannot build a nuclear power plant when the size of the country is about half of the evacuation zone set up in Japan after the Fukushima crisis. Number of countries in the region also adjusted their plans after Fukushima, which I think is a good positive development. Arab Spring also has its impact in the regions and plans of the countries of the region. For example, the project of Russia to build nuclear power plant in Turkey was affected when during the military operation, Russian military plane was shot by Turkey on the border between Syria and Turkey. The project was delayed for almost 1 year, and there was a high chance that it would be cancelled, but as of now it's being implemented. And other factors, of course, nuclear energy after Fukushima became much more expensive than it was before, and also the price for hydrocarbons went down, and it was quite dramatic. And again, one of the recent development here, which was not listed in the report when it was published in 2016, it's the cost reduction of solar, for example, and other alternative sources of electricity. So we'll skip a few slides. So in 2016, there were 3 projects under construction in the region. It's Bushehr, and it's Bushehr 1, which is operational, as Professor Kim mentioned, from 2011. Russia and Iran signed contract to build 2 more, and it is expected that the first concrete will be poured next year, and the second unit will be completed by 2024, and it is expected to be operational by 2026. And the third unit will be built a year after, will be completed a year after. Baraka nuclear power plant is operational, as Professor Kim mentioned. 4 units are going to be operational very soon. And Akuyu nuclear power plant, the first concrete was poured this year. It is expected that 4 units will be completed by 2026. The recent developments since the report was published, Russia and Egypt signed a contract for nuclear power plant construction, and it is expected that 4 units will be built within the next 10 years. So in our report, which I mentioned at the beginning, we made we shared our proposals or our vision, what the prospects of the nuclear power in the region are. And there are 2 scenarios. The first what we call optimistic scenario, which I think is not easy to implement. It's not very likely that it will be implemented. So our suggestion was that it is possible, not likely, but possible that 33 units will be built in 6 countries of the region by 2013. Now I should mention that some projects here already been cancelled. For example, in Jordan, there were a number of reasons why this project was cancelled: lack of funds for the project, seismic activity of the site which was chosen, lack of water, pressure from some neighbor countries, but finally the project was cancelled. Iran announced that it will build 7 nuclear reactors, 1 is operational, 6 other with the Russia's assistance. I'm not sure that all 6 new will be built. I think most likely 2 or at best 4 will be built within the next 10 years or so. UAE also completing the first nuclear power plant with 4 reactors. There are some plans to build nearby the second nuclear power plants, but as of today, even the vendor has not been chosen. Saudi Arabia developed its plans, but it's also a big issue when the construction will start, who will operate this reactor, because I like the approach which Professor mentioned, that Saudi Arabia invested a lot in the manpower development, but I do have my skepticism and reservation that Saudi nationals will be interested to be actively involved in nuclear power plant operation. And Turkey announced quite ambitious plans. The first nuclear power plant is under construction, but again, even for the second one, the vendor has not yet been chosen. So, but if you will compare those optimistic scenarios with the plans which were announced by countries of the region from 2005 to 2010, you will come to the conclusion that at best 1/3 of those reactors which were announced could be built. But again, I personally don't think that this scenario could be implemented.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, good. There is a pessimistic scenario. 3 countries, 11 reactors by 2013. I mean, Iran, I think it's very realistic that it will have 3 units by 2030. I think even earlier than that. UAE, 4 reactors. Again, I think it will be a reality very soon. So just to compare, in 2011 we had just 1 reactor in Iran. By 2030, I think we'll have actually more than 11. And Turkey. There are many political issues as part of that project. This is a NATO country. Also, there is strong criticism inside Russia with regard to Rosatom State Nuclear Corporation, why we should use state money, 25 billion of state money to build nuclear power plant in Turkey. But again, it's quite likely that the project will be completed, at least if Erdogan will stay in power during the time of the project implementation. So if this scenario will be implemented, I think about 10% of those reactors which were announced from 2005, 2010 will have been built. And I should mention that it is quite likely, I think, that to those 3 countries, Egypt could join with 4 more units by 2030. This is about the time when these units are expected. I'm sorry, it's a long way. So the very final topic, because we discussed legislation yesterday, and I would like to pay attention to this slide during my last minute. In the Russian system, if you would like to build nuclear power plant or develop nuclear, if you would like to build actually nuclear power plant, there are 3 layers of legislation. First, this is Intergovernmental Agreement on Peaceful Nuclear Cooperation. This is a kind of 1-to-3 agreement in US system. And Russia signed those agreements with most countries of the region. If you would like to build nuclear power plant, second intergovernmental agreement is needed, specifically on construction of nuclear power plant. And Russia signed this agreement with a number of countries during the recent years. Saudi Arabia also added to this, to the category of countries which have this kind of agreement with Russia. And the final level, if a country would like to build nuclear power plant, it has to sign a contract for nuclear power plant construction. Egypt signed a contract with Russia at the end of 2016. It is in force starting from 2017. So this is about the plans of the countries of the region with regard the nuclear power development. And again, my expectation that by 2030, and this is the cover of the report, by 2030 it's quite likely that we will have, I would say, between 10 and 15 nuclear power reactors, operational nuclear power reactors in the region, most likely in 4 countries, including Iran, including Turkey, including UAE, including Egypt. With regard to Saudi Arabia, I personally have some reservation because, I mean, there is no question about funds, but there is a question of manpower. Who will operate that? And to my knowledge, we face a similar problem in UAE, when the reactors are almost ready, but manpower is not ready. And I think in Saudi Arabia, the issue of manpower would be even more complicated than in UAE. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khlopkov.